Commander Vexthal stared at the holographic display, floating above his command console, and rubbed his 4 eyes with tired tentacles. The Deep Space Monitoring Station Omega-7 had been his home for the past 15 years, and in all that time, he had cataloged over 2,000 primitive species making their first clumsy attempts at faster-than-light travel. Most of them barely managed to achieve basic warp drives before blowing themselves up or getting lost in the void between stars. The energy signature on his screen looked familiar yet wrong somehow. It registered as a basic jump drive system, the kind that newly spacefaring species typically developed after they figured out how to split atoms and harness fusion power. But there was something odd about the readings that made his secondary brain itch with curiosity. The energy pattern seemed too clean, too efficient for a primitive civilization. "Sir, we have a vessel emerging from hyperspace at coordinates 77 Mark IV, announced Lieutenant Zexara from her position at the sensor station. Her voice carried the bored tone of someone who had seen this routine play out countless times before. "Energy signature matches standard jump drive technology, estimated tech level 3 on the galactic development scale." Vexthal nodded and made a note in his daily report. Another backwater species taking their first tentative steps into the greater galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire's protocol was simple and effective: monitor, evaluate, contact, and integrate. Most species were grateful to learn they were not alone in the universe, and those who resisted quickly discovered the futility of fighting an empire that spanned 3 galaxies. The vessel that materialized in the void was unlike anything in Vexthal's extensive database. It appeared to be constructed from simple metal alloys, probably steel or titanium based on the spectral analysis. The design was crude and angular, lacking the elegant curves that characterized advanced starship architecture. It measured roughly 600 meters in length and had multiple protrusions that looked like primitive weapon systems or communication arrays. "Run a full scan," Vexthal ordered, though he already knew what the results would show. The ship would have basic shielding, primitive weapons, and a crew of nervous aliens who had just made their first journey beyond their home system. He had seen it all before, and the routine rarely varied. The scan results appeared on his screen. Moments later, and Vexthal's third eye widened in surprise. The vessel's hull was composed of unknown metallic compounds that seemed to shift and adapt to the scanning beam. The energy readings were off the charts, but they were distributed through the ship in patterns that made no logical sense. Most disturbing of all, the ship's power source was completely unidentifiable. "Lieutenant, run the scan again," Vexthal commanded. "There seems to be an error in the readings." While his subordinate worked to recalibrate the sensors, Vexthal studied the strange vessel through the station's primary viewing port. The ship called itself Liberty's Edge according to the basic identification beacon it was broadcasting, and it claimed to be from a species called humans who originated from a planet called Earth. Inside the human vessel, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the alien monitoring station through the main view screen. He was a tall man with graying hair and steady, blue eyes that had seen combat in the Martian colonial wars. His uniform was simple dark blue fabric with minimal decorations, a stark contrast to the elaborate dress codes favored by most galactic civilizations. "Captain, we're being scanned by what appears to be a deep space monitoring station," reported Lieutenant Commander Lisa Bennett from her position at the tactical console. She was a young woman with short brown hair and quick fingers that danced across her control panel with practiced efficiency. "Their technology seems fairly advanced, but I'm not detecting any immediate threats." Morrison nodded and walked to the center of the bridge, where a holographic display showed the alien station in detail. It was a massive structure that looked like it had been grown rather than built, with organic curves and what appeared to be living tissue integrated into its hull. The design was beautiful in an alien way, but it also radiated an aura of power that made Morrison's military instincts tingle with caution. "Any response to our standard greeting?" Morrison asked Communications Officer Kelly Washington, a cheerful woman with red hair, who had volunteered for the mission because she loved the challenge of learning new languages. "Nothing yet, sir," Kelly replied while monitoring multiple communication frequencies. I'm detecting some kind of discussion happening on their internal channels, but their language is completely unlike anything in our database. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper looked up from his engineering console and caught Morrison's attention. Cooper was a stocky man with calloused hands and an intuitive understanding of machinery that had served him well during humanity's rapid expansion into space. Captain, their scans are more sophisticated than we initially thought. They're trying to penetrate our hull plating, but our adaptive armor is automatically adjusting to their sensor frequencies. Morrison felt a familiar tightness in his chest. That always preceded potential conflict. The Liberty's Edge was not actually a warship despite its impressive capabilities. It was an exploration vessel designed to make peaceful contact with alien civilizations and establish trade relationships. The fact that it could defend itself was merely a practical consideration in a universe that might not always be friendly. Keep our defensive systems on standby, but don't power up anything that might be interpreted as aggressive, Morrison ordered. We're here to make friends, not start an interstellar war. Back on the monitoring station, Commander Vexthal was growing increasingly frustrated with his equipment. 3 separate scans had produced 3 different sets of readings, all of them impossible according to known physics. The human vessels seemed to be adapting to his sensors in real time, which should have been impossible for a primitive species. Sir, I'm getting some very strange readings from their power source, reported Lieutenant Zexara. It appears to be some kind of controlled singularity, but the energy output is far beyond anything we've seen before. Vexthal's tentacles twitched with alarm. Controlled singularities were theoretical technology that even the Empire's most advanced scientists had never successfully implemented. The idea that a primitive species could casually deploy such power was not just unlikely, it was terrifying. Contact Admiral Kethmer immediately, Vexthal ordered. We need a full diplomatic team and a military escort. This situation is far beyond standard first contact protocol. As the commander composed his urgent message to Fleet Command, the human vessel continued its patient orbit around the monitoring station. Captain Morrison had decided to wait for the aliens to make the first move, hoping that patience would demonstrate humanity's peaceful intentions. Neither side realized that they were both operating under completely false assumptions about each other's capabilities and intentions, setting the stage for a misunderstanding that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Admiral Kethmer received Commander Vexthal's urgent message while reviewing fleet deployment reports in his luxurious command chamber aboard the flagship, Eternal Dominion. The Admiral was a veteran of dozens of first contact scenarios and had personally overseen the integration of 17 different species into the Empire's vast network of client civilizations. His approach was always the same: overwhelming displays of technological superiority followed by generous offers of protection and advancement under Imperial guidance. The message from the monitoring station was troubling, but Kethmer had dealt with anomalous readings before. Sometimes primitive species stumbled upon dangerous technologies they did not understand, and it was the Empire's duty to contain such threats before they could harm themselves or others. He immediately dispatched 12 dreadnoughts from the Third Fleet to handle what he assumed would be a routine intimidation and capture operation. Fleet Admiral Zarthik commanded the intimidation force from his flagship Cosmic Fury, a massive vessel that stretched over 2 kilometers in length and bristled with enough firepower to level a small moon. Zarthik was known throughout the fleet for his ability to end conflicts before they began, usually through carefully orchestrated displays of Imperial might that left opposing forces with no choice but immediate surrender. The 12 dreadnoughts dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation around the human vessel, their hulls gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with menacing energy. Each ship was a masterpiece of Imperial engineering, grown rather than built, with living weapon systems that could adapt to any threat. The sight of the assembled fleet had never failed to produce instant submission from primitive species. Captain Morrison watched the alien fleet materialize around his ship, and felt his stomach tighten with familiar pre-battle tension. The enemy vessels were beautiful in their own way, but they radiated an unmistakable aura of threat that made every human on the bridge unconsciously straighten their shoulders and prepare for conflict. 12 heavy cruisers, sir, reported Lisa Bennett from the tactical station. They're maintaining a defensive formation, but their weapon systems are powered and ready to fire. I'm reading plasma cannons, particle beams, and some kind of energy projection system I don't recognize. Morrison nodded grimly and activated the ship's internal communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We have multiple alien warships surrounding our position. I want everyone to remain calm and follow standard protocols. We're not looking for a fight, but we'll defend ourselves if necessary. Communications Officer Kelly Washington suddenly looked up from her console with alarm. Captain, I'm receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. It's being broadcast on multiple frequencies and appears to be some kind of ultimatum. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the imposing figure of Fleet Admiral Zarthik. The alien was nearly 3 meters tall with 4 muscular arms and skin that shifted between deep purple and silver. His voice was artificially amplified to sound more intimidating, and his words carried the weight of absolute authority. Primitive vessel, you are in violation of Imperial space and in possession of dangerous technology beyond your species' development level. You will immediately surrender your ship and submit to Imperial inspection. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. You have 30 seconds to comply. Morrison felt anger rise in his chest at the alien's arrogant tone, but he forced himself to remain calm. Diplomacy was always the preferred option, even when dealing with obvious bullies. Open a channel, Kelly. The communication link crackled to life, and Morrison stepped forward to address the alien fleet commander. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Liberty's Edge. We appreciate your concern, but we are peaceful explorers from Earth, conducting a survey mission in what we believe to be unclaimed space. We have no intention of causing trouble and would welcome the opportunity to establish friendly relations with your empire. Zarthik's response was immediate and dismissive. Your claims are irrelevant. All space belongs to the empire by right of conquest and superior development. You will surrender immediately or face the consequences of your defiance. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper had been quietly monitoring the alien fleet's energy signatures while the diplomatic exchange continued. He looked up from his console with a concerned expression. Captain, their weapons are powering up. I'm detecting massive energy buildups in their primary systems. Morrison made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Power up our defensive systems and prepare the zero-point energy core for emergency protocols. I want our adaptive hull plating at maximum efficiency. The Liberty's Edge had been designed with humanity's hard-learned lessons from centuries of warfare. The ship's defensive systems were based on principles that the galaxy had never encountered, including controlled gravity fields and matter energy conversion, technology that could turn incoming attacks into additional power for the ship's systems. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, the ship's science officer, had been analyzing the alien fleet's technology since their arrival. She was a brilliant physicist who had helped develop many of the Liberty's Edge's most innovative systems. Captain, their technology is actually less advanced than it appears. They're using brute force approaches where we would use elegant solutions. Fleet. Admiral Zarthik grew impatient with the humans' continued resistance. In his experience, primitive species either surrendered immediately or launched futile attacks that were quickly crushed. The humans were doing neither, which was both puzzling and infuriating. Fire warning shots, Zarthik commanded. Target their propulsion systems and disable their ability to escape. The Imperial fleet opened fire with precisely calculated plasma bolts designed to cripple the human vessel without destroying it completely. The energy beams streaked across space in brilliant displays of concentrated power that should have overwhelmed any primitive defensive system. Morrison watched the incoming fire on his tactical display and felt time slow down as his combat training took over. Evasive maneuvers. Activate hull absorption protocols. The Liberty's edge moved with impossible grace for a vessel of its size, sliding between the incoming plasma bolts as if it were dancing rather than fighting. The few energy beams that did connect with the ship's hull were absorbed by the adaptive plating and converted directly into the ship's power grid. Zarthik stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The human vessel had not only survived his warning shots but had actually become stronger as a result. The energy readings from the primitive ship were now significantly higher than they had been before the attack. Impossible, Zarthik muttered. Run full analysis on their defensive systems? Lieutenant Commander Lisa Bennett smiled grimly as she watched the alien fleet's confusion. Captain, they're trying to scan our hull plating. Should I let them see how it works? Morrison considered the tactical situation. The aliens had opened fire first, which gave humanity the moral authority to respond with force. But he still hoped to avoid an all-out battle that could escalate into a larger conflict. Show them just enough to make them think twice about attacking? Again, Morrison ordered. But keep our real capabilities hidden for now. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force both sides to reassess everything they thought they knew about warfare in the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Zarthik stared at his tactical display with growing disbelief as the human vessel continued to absorb his fleet's plasma fire without showing any signs of damage. In over 30 years of military service, he had never encountered a defensive system that could convert weapon energy into additional power for the target. The concept violated everything he understood about combat engineering and energy physics. Sir, the primitive vessel is moving again, reported his tactical officer with barely concealed panic. They're not using conventional propulsion. The energy signatures suggest they're manipulating spacetime itself. Zarthik watched in horror as the Liberty's edge began to move through space in ways that should have been impossible. The ship seemed to fold reality around itself, disappearing from one location and reappearing in another without crossing the intervening distance. It was as if the humans had learned to teleport their entire vessel at will. Captain Morrison felt a surge of satisfaction as he watched the alien fleet's confusion through the main view screen. The Liberty's Edge's quantum-fold propulsion system was one of humanity's most closely guarded secrets. Developed during the early days of interstellar exploration when human ships needed to outrun dangers they could not yet fight. Danny, prepare the gravity well generators, Morrison ordered. If they want to escalate this situation, let's show them what human engineering can really do. Weapons Officer Danny Martinez was a quiet man who had spent most of his career designing defensive systems for human colonies. He had never imagined that his peaceful inventions would be used in actual combat, but he was grimly pleased to see how effective they were against alien aggression. Gravity wells online, Captain, Martinez reported. I'm detecting massive energy buildups from the alien fleet. They're preparing for a full assault. Admiral Zarthik had reached the limit of his patience with the mysterious human vessel. Whatever technology they possessed, it was clearly beyond anything his database contained information about. The only logical response was to overwhelm them with enough firepower to overcome any defensive system. All ships, concentrated fire on the primitive vessel, Zarthik commanded. Maximum power to all weapon systems. I want that ship disabled. Immediately. The 12 Imperial dreadnoughts unleashed a coordinated barrage that lit up the darkness of space like a miniature star going supernova. Plasma beams, particle cannons, and exotic energy weapons all converged on the Liberty's edge. In a display of destruction that could have leveled entire cities, the combined firepower was enough to destroy a small moon, and Zarthik was confident that no vessel could survive such an assault. The human ship vanished completely as the massive energy storm engulfed its position. For a moment, Zarthik allowed himself to feel satisfaction at having ended the threat. Then his sensors began reporting impossible readings that made his blood run cold. The Liberty's Edge reappeared exactly where it had been before the attack, completely undamaged and radiating even more power than before. The ship's hull seemed to shimmer with absorbed energy, and strange distortions in spacetime were visible around its edges. Report, Zarthik demanded, though his voice now carried a note of desperation. Sir, they deployed some kind of shield system that absorbed our entire attack, his science officer reported with trembling tentacles. The energy readings suggest they're using controlled micro-black holes to create gravitational barriers around their vessel. Dr. Amy Rodriguez smiled with professional satisfaction as she monitored the Liberty's Edge's defensive systems. The micro-black hole shield generators were her own invention, based on humanity's advanced understanding of exotic matter manipulation. The system didn't just block incoming attacks. It converted the energy into fuel for the ship's own systems. Captain, we're at 140% power capacity, Rodriguez reported. Their attack has actually made us stronger than we were at the start of this encounter. Morrison nodded grimly. The aliens had forced him into a position where he had to demonstrate human capabilities he had hoped to keep secret. Now there was no choice but to show them exactly what they were dealing with. Danny, prepare a demonstration shot, Morrison ordered. Something that will get their attention without actually hurting anyone. Martinez worked quickly at his console, calculating angles and power levels for what would become the most important shot in galactic history. The Liberty's Edge carried weapons that were technically mining tools, designed to break apart asteroids and clear debris from shipping lanes. But in the hands of a skilled operator, they could be devastating. Target the lead vessel's weapon. Systems, Morrison commanded. I want them disabled, not destroyed. Transport their crew to safety before impact. The Liberty's Edge fired a single gravitational pulse that traveled across space at the speed of light. The weapon was invisible to conventional sensors, but its effects were immediately obvious. The Imperial flagship's weapon system simply ceased to exist, compressed into a sphere of super-dense matter that was then transported away from the ship. Admiral Zarthik felt his legs give way as he watched his flagship's primary armament disappear. Without explanation, the human vessel had demonstrated the ability to selectively destroy parts of his ship while leaving the crew completely unharmed. The implications were terrifying. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel, his communications officer reported. They're asking if we'd like to continue this engagement. Morrison's voice came through the communication system with calm authority. Admiral, I believe we've both demonstrated our capabilities. My ship is designed for exploration and peaceful contact, not warfare. However, we are prepared to defend ourselves against any aggression. I suggest we step back from this situation before someone gets hurt. The Imperial crews watched in stunned silence as the Liberty's Edge moved through their formation with casual ease, its defensive systems effortlessly deflecting any weapon fire that came too close. The human ship seemed to treat the massive Imperial dreadnoughts as minor obstacles rather than serious threats. Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper had been monitoring the alien fleet's reactions throughout the engagement. Captain, their power systems are fluctuating. I think they're preparing to retreat. Let them go, Morrison replied. We've made our point. Kelly, send a message to their fleet command. Tell them we're still interested in peaceful negotiations whenever they're ready to talk. As the Imperial fleet began to withdraw in confusion and defeat, none of them realized that they had just witnessed the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. The age of Imperial dominance was ending, and humanity had announced its arrival on the galactic stage in a way that would never be forgotten. The news of the Third Fleet's defeat spread through the Zephyrian Empire's communication networks like wildfire, reaching every corner of their vast territory within hours. Military commanders who had never known defeat suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare and technology. The impossible had happened. A single primitive vessel had neutralized an entire Imperial fleet without sustaining any damage. Emperor Multhara received the reports in his crystal throne room on the capital world of Zephyros Prime. The Emperor was an ancient being who had ruled the galaxy for over 3 centuries, guiding the Empire through countless wars and expansions. His 4 advisors stood before him with expressions of barely controlled panic as they delivered the unthinkable news. Your Majesty, Fleet Admiral Zarthik confirms that the human vessel demonstrated capabilities far beyond our current understanding of physics, reported Defense Minister Kolvex, his voice trembling with uncertainty. They appear to have mastered controlled gravity manipulation, space-time folding, and energy absorption techniques that our scientists consider purely theoretical. Emperor Mothara remained silent for long moments, his ancient mind processing the implications of what he had heard. In 3 centuries of rule, he had never encountered a species that could challenge imperial supremacy so completely. The very foundation of his empire rested on technological superiority, and if that advantage was gone, everything would change. "Convene an emergency session of the Galactic Council," the Emperor commanded. "All member species must be informed of this development immediately. We cannot allow panic to spread through our territories, but we also cannot ignore the threat these humans represent." The Galactic Council chambers on the neutral world of Nexus Station filled with representatives from dozens of species as news of the human encounter reached them. The massive circular chamber buzzed with nervous energy as beings from across the galaxy gathered to discuss a threat unlike anything they had ever faced. Shardsinger, Valana of the Crystalline Collective, was among the first to speak. Her species had served as the Empire's primary technology developers for centuries, their mineral-based minds capable of processing complex mathematical equations at incredible speeds. But even her advanced intellect struggled to comprehend what the humans had accomplished. "Honored colleagues, my people have analyzed the battle recordings provided by the Third Fleet," Valana announced, her crystalline form glowing with agitation. "The mathematical principles underlying human technology are fundamentally different from our own. They appear to have developed multiple independent solutions to problems we considered unsolvable." Representative Thamer of the Aquatic Dominion raised a webbed hand to speak. His species had contributed biological computing systems to the Empire's technology base, but even their organic processors couldn't understand human innovations. "The energy patterns we observe suggest that humans don't just use technology, they think about it differently. Their approaches are chaotic, unpredictable, but somehow more efficient than our standardized methods." Meanwhile, Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Liberty's Edge, watching as more human vessels began to arrive at the edge of the star system. The reinforcements were not warships, but rather a collection of exploration vessels, research platforms, and civilian transports that had been diverted from their original missions to provide support for humanity's first major contact with a galactic civilization. "Captain, we're receiving communications from the human fleet," reported Kelly Washington. "Admiral Patricia Hayes aboard the research vessel New Horizons is requesting permission to establish a temporary base of operations in this system," Morrison nodded approvingly. Admiral Hayes was one of humanity's most experienced diplomats, and her presence would be invaluable in the coming negotiations. The Liberty's Edge had been designed for exploration, not as a flagship for humanity's entry into galactic politics. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been monitoring Imperial communication networks since the battle ended, using the Liberty's Edge's advanced sensors to intercept and translate alien transmissions. Her findings were both encouraging and concerning. "Captain, I'm detecting massive communication traffic throughout the Empire's territory," Rodriguez reported. "It appears that news of our encounter has reached their leadership, and they're convening some kind of emergency assembly." The translation: "Algorithms are still working on the details, but it seems like they're treating this as a major crisis." Commander Steve Parker, the ship's diplomatic officer, looked up from his console with a thoughtful expression. Parker was a former ambassador who had volunteered for the mission because he believed that humanity's future lay in peaceful cooperation with other species. "Sir, I'm receiving a formal diplomatic transmission from the Imperial capital. They're requesting direct communication with our leadership." Morrison felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The fact that the Empire wanted to talk was encouraging, but he knew that the next few hours would determine whether humanity's entry into galactic society would be peaceful or violent. "Put me through to Admiral Hayes," Morrison ordered. "She needs to know what we're dealing with before we respond to their message." The holographic image of Admiral Hayes appeared on the bridge's main screen. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and intelligent eyes that had seen decades of interstellar diplomacy. Her uniform was pristine despite the hasty journey to reach the crisis zone. "Jake, I've reviewed the battle reports," Hayes said without preamble. "You handled a difficult situation with remarkable restraint. The fact that you disabled their weapons without killing anyone has probably saved us from a much larger conflict." Morrison nodded gratefully. "Admiral, they're requesting formal diplomatic contact. I think they're finally ready to take us seriously." Hayes smiled slightly. "Good, I've brought a full diplomatic team and some of our best xenobiologists. We'll need to understand their culture before we can negotiate effectively." "What's your assessment of their mindset?" "They're used to being the dominant power," Morrison replied. "The concept of meeting an equal seems to have shaken them badly. But they're not stupid, and they recognize that fighting us would be pointless." Chief Engineer Ryan Cooper had been listening to the conversation while monitoring the approaching human fleet. "Admiral, we've got 12 exploration vessels, 4 research platforms, and 2 mobile construction ships on approach. If you want to make an impression, we can have a full temporary base operational within 6 hours." Hayes considered the tactical situation. The Empire had tried to intimidate humanity with a show of force, and it had backfired spectacularly. Now it was time to demonstrate that humans could be generous partners when treated with respect. "Do it," Hayes commanded. "But make sure everything we build is obviously civilian in nature. We want them to understand that we're here for peaceful purposes, not conquest." As the human fleet began to establish their temporary base, representatives from across the galaxy prepared to witness negotiations that would reshape the balance of power in the universe. The age of imperial dominance was ending, and a new era of cooperation was about to begin. The formal negotiations began 3 days after the human fleet established their temporary base near the Zephyrian monitoring station. The meeting took place aboard the neutral vessel Harmony Bridge, a specially designed diplomatic ship that had been hastily constructed using both human and imperial technology. The vessel itself was a symbol of what cooperation between the species could achieve when they worked together instead of against each other. Emperor Multhara arrived with a delegation of his most trusted advisors, including representatives from every major species in the Empire. The Emperor had decided to handle the negotiations personally, recognizing that the outcome would determine the future of galactic civilization. His ancient eyes studied the human delegation with curiosity and barely concealed apprehension. "Admiral." Patricia Hayes led the human diplomatic team with quiet confidence. She had spent her career preparing for moments like this, though she had never imagined that humanity's first major contact with a galactic civilization would begin with a military confrontation. Beside her sat Captain Morrison, Dr. Rodriguez, and Commander Parker, along with several other specialists who had been selected for their expertise in xenobiology and cultural analysis. "Your Majesty," Hayes began, her voice carrying the formal tone appropriate for addressing galactic royalty, "we are honored by your presence and grateful for this opportunity to resolve our differences through peaceful dialogue." Emperor Multhara nodded gravely. "Admiral Hayes, your species has demonstrated capabilities that challenge our understanding of what is possible. We would be foolish to ignore such a development, but we must also protect the stability of our civilization." The first topic of discussion was the Liberty's Edge and its apparent military capabilities. The Emperor's military advisors were particularly concerned about the implications of human technology for galactic security. Defense Minister Kolvex leaned forward with obvious tension. "Admiral, your vessel displayed weapon systems that could threaten the stability of the entire galaxy," Kolvex stated. "How can we be certain that your species will not use such technology for conquest?" Captain Morrison spoke up with a slight smile. "Minister, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the Liberty's Edge and its capabilities. We're not actually a warship at all." The alien delegation exchanged confused glances. Admiral Zarthik, who had been present during the original confrontation, looked particularly puzzled. "Captain, your vessel defeated an entire Imperial fleet. If you're not a warship, what are you?" Dr. Rodriguez activated a holographic display that showed detailed schematics of the Liberty's Edge. "Honored delegates, our ship is an exploration vessel designed for scientific research and peaceful contact with alien civilizations. What you interpreted as weapons are actually tools that we use for asteroid mining, planetary surveys, and deep space construction projects," the revelation sent shockwaves through the Imperial delegation. The idea that human civilian technology could so easily defeat their most advanced military vessels was even more disturbing than the possibility of facing human warships. "You're telling us that you defeated our fleet using mining equipment?" Emperor Mothara asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's correct, Your Majesty," Hayes confirmed. "Our gravity well generators are normally used to break apart asteroids for resource extraction. Our energy absorption systems are designed to collect solar radiation and cosmic particles for power generation. We adapted these systems for defensive purposes when your fleet opened fire on us." Commander Parker pulled up additional displays showing other human vessels in the temporary fleet. "As you can see, our ships are designed for different purposes. We have research platforms for studying stellar phenomena, construction vessels for building space habitats, and transport ships for moving personnel and supplies between star systems." The Emperor's science advisor, a spindly creature named Zexthal, had been analyzing the human ship designs with growing amazement. "Your Majesty, their approach to technology is completely different from ours, where we focus on standardized solutions that can be mass-produced. They appear to have developed thousands of specialized tools for specific tasks." Dr. Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly right. Human civilization has always been characterized by diversity and innovation. We encourage different groups to explore different approaches to solving problems, which leads to breakthrough discoveries that might not occur in a more centralized system. But how do you maintain coordination and efficiency with such chaos?" asked Representative Fainmer of the Aquatic Dominion. Hayes smiled. "We've learned that what appears to be chaos is actually a form of organized complexity. By allowing different human communities to pursue their own technological paths, we ensure that our species is never dependent on a single solution to any problem. If one approach fails, we have dozens of alternatives ready to try." The concept was revolutionary to the assembled alien delegates. The Empire had achieved its dominance through standardization and centralized control. But the humans had somehow achieved greater results through controlled diversity and creative freedom. Emperor Mothara spent several minutes in silent contemplation. Before speaking again, "Admiral Hayes, what does your species want from us? Are you seeking to replace our empire with your own?" "Not at all, Your Majesty," Hayes replied firmly. "We want to join the galactic community as equal partners, not as conquerors. We believe that cooperation between different species and different approaches to technology will benefit everyone." Commander Parker leaned forward. "Your Majesty, we propose a technology exchange program. We would be willing to share some of our innovations in exchange for access to your stellar cartography and resource networks. We could also establish joint research stations where scientists from different species could work together on projects that benefit the entire galaxy." The Emperor's advisors began discussing the proposal among themselves in hushed tones. The idea of voluntary cooperation between equals was foreign to their experience, but the potential benefits were obvious. "What guarantees can you provide that your technology will not be used for aggression?" Defense Minister Kovacs asked. Dr. Rodriguez answered, "Minister, we propose that all shared technology be limited to peaceful applications. Our scientists would work alongside yours to ensure that any innovations are used for exploration, construction, and research rather than warfare." After hours of detailed negotiations, Emperor Mothara made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. "Admiral Hayes, the Empire accepts your proposal. We will establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity and begin the technology exchange program you have described. The agreement was signed in a ceremony that was broadcast throughout the galaxy. The first human galactic research station was established 6 months later, with scientists from dozens of species working together to explore new possibilities in physics, engineering, and biology. Captain Morrison was promoted to admiral and placed in command of humanity's integration into galactic society. The Liberty's Edge became the flagship of a new era of cooperation, its crew serving as ambassadors and explorers in a galaxy that had suddenly become much larger and more interesting. Years later, children from dozens of different species would play together on the research stations while their parents worked to solve problems that had once seemed impossible. The age of imperial dominance had ended not through conquest, but through the simple recognition that different approaches to the same challenges could create solutions that benefited everyone. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a gun or a bomb, but an idea whose time has come.